Shalom and welcome. You're listening to Temple Talk from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim Richman here together with Yitzchak, Reuven, and today is the 19th day of the month of Adar, 5778. That means it's the 6th of March, 2018. And this Shabbat, we will be reading the penultimate and the ultimate last two Torah portions of the book of Exodus, Vayakhel and Pekudei. And I must point out that this Shabbat is also the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which will occur next Shabbat. And finally, no, not finally, penultimately, I must say that this is also the third of the four special Sabbaths that precede Passover. This is Parashat Para. This is the Sabbath of the additional reading of the maftir from the book of Numbers, chapter 19, the Ordinance of the Red Heifer. And ultimately, I must point out that it's also this Shabbat is the 23rd day of the month of Adar, which means that it is the first day of the 7-day period of the inauguration of the Tabernacle. And as some of you may remember, 23rd of Adar is also my anniversary. So I want to take this opportunity to thank my wife, who may or may not be listening. Thank her for marrying me 38 years ago on the 23rd of Adar, first day of the 7-day period of the inauguration of the Tabernacle.
The inauguration, which is mentioned at the close of Pekudei or at the beginning of Vayikra. It's in this week's Parashat, the inauguration, reference to
Absolutely, in Pekudei, and then we'll be reading about it in the book of Leviticus in Parashat Shmini, on the 8th day of the dedication ceremony, which was the day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan itself.
Mazal Tov, Rabbi, on your
thank you very much, Yitzchak. Yes.
I'm not going to ask you how many years.
I said it. You weren't listening. 38.
38 years.
Yes, this would be the time for the romantic in me to say, but you know what? It just feels like 38 minutes.
Wow.
Well, enough about my anniversary. So, Parashat Vayakhel Pekudei is such an amazing crescendo of an end to the book of Exodus. Our first Torah portion, beginning in chapter 35 of the book of Exodus, is taking place the day after Yom Kippur. Moshe comes down from Mount Sinai, and all is forgiven, and he assembles the people and commands them in all of the details of the tabernacle, the construction of the tabernacle. It begins with the precept of Shabbat in this assembly, where he had the entire nation assembled together. And then he goes on and he gives over all the details that we have learned about in the Parshiot of Truma and Tetzaveh and Kitisa, but that was when Hashem was giving it over to him intimately on Mount Sinai himself, and now it's all being repeated. And by the way, in this week's video lesson, God willing, on these two Torah portions, we're going to explore kind of in a new way, a little deeper, the connection between Shabbat and the Tabernacle, which is a rather extraordinary insight. One of the amazing features of this week's first Torah portion of Parashat Vayakhel is the conspicuous and rather ubiquitous mention of the attribute, I'll call it an attribute, of those that were motivated because of their hearts. Those whose hearts led them to contribute to the construction of the tabernacle. And we have we have some form of the word heart in this portion. I would say at least 15 times. There are those whose hearts carry them. There are those of generous heart. There are those of the wise heart. There were those who are generous spirits, and as we've said many times before, that was the basis of the whole concept of making a place for Hashem in this world. And Yitzchak, as you and I have talked about, I mean, all these precious materials that they happen to have with them in the middle of nowhere, right there. They're traveling through the desert. The conditions are very harsh. They have nothing with them. And yet the people are coming forth with these amazing materials that Hashem required, these very special colors, these dyes, gold, silver, copper, these incredible things. And this is all material that they received as payment for their servitude of hundreds of years in Egypt. So it's not even theirs, really. Hashem basically gave it to them because they found favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. They come out into the desert, in the parking lot of the desert. They've got all this stuff. And apparently there are those who were more forthcoming than others, because there were those who gave minimalistically, like what they had to, and there were those who gave even more than they had to. And that's the difference between these different expressions of who was motivated, whose heart lifted them. The ones whose heart lifted them went above and beyond. But it all comes from this desire to want to see this happen, and it's really amazing, the whole connection between the heart and the tabernacle, which of course is the heart, the beating heart, the pulsating heart, the center of the nation. And those who were participating here were only those who were motivated by their heart.
But at one point, Moshe had to tell people to stop bringing, because they had brought so much that they had all the materials that they required.
So actually, there's a verse. It's chapter 36 and verse 3, where it says, beginning in verse 2, it says, "From Moshe's presence they took the entire gift that the children of Israel had brought for the work, for the labor of the sanctuary to do it." And the next verse says, "But they continued to bring him free will gifts morning after morning." Baboker, baboker. So our sages tell us that expression teaches us that actually the whole thing was completed in 2 days. They brought everything within 2 mornings. And then he had to tell them that it was enough, and that there was more than enough. There was extra, and then the work began. So this whole thing is so amazing. And then, of course, the second Torah portion that we will bridge and with it conclude the book of Exodus this week is Parashat Pekudei, which seems very repetitious, the first part of it. Because on a surface level, ostensibly, because it's all this, what they call in Hebrew, hitchashbanut, which means like this reckoning, this basically the receipts.
The accounting
of all of the materials, of all of the numbers and all the materials. But everything here is so precise and of such concern and of such praise, really, for the people of Israel that they actually did this, that they actually pulled it off. You know, some people interpret the whole concept of this reckoning in Parashat Pekudei to show that Moshe was so transparent in his leadership and his capacity as being, the treasurer and the architect, or the go-to guy, the project manager, that the Torah records that every single penny, every single detail, every single aspect of all these precious materials was exactly accounted for, and there was nothing that anyone could, God forbid, accuse him of being corrupt, as is popular today with leaders. We won't go any further than that, but nobody can accuse him of being, of taking any sort of embezzling anything.
And he could have done that for the benefit of Israel. And he could also have done it for the benefit of God. I mean, he's showing his...
Another level that I feel that this reckoning, another aspect that I think it teaches us is just the very fact that it was done all together is such an amazing idea. In other words, you take these people who basically, when they were taken out of Egypt, they were a motley crew. They were a ragtag bunch. They were not a cohesive unit.
Right.
And this is now they're at Sinai. They receive their constitution. They make their pact with God. They make the covenant, and now they are really becoming a nation with a purpose. Now they have a purpose,
Right.
Their purpose that they know now for the rest of their lives is to make a home for God in this world. And just like you and I, this is our life's work. We've been working on the concept of the rebuilding of the temple for close to 30 years. And one of the things that we hear the most often is like, this is so unrealistic. You can't do this. You can't do it under these circumstances. You can't do it in this world. It can't be done. And I'm sure that they heard the same thing, and I'm sure some of them felt that way, and I'm sure that the other nations around them were expressing that. And the biggest testimony, the simplest testimony to the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people is just the fact that it was actually done. They actually completed it, and that's why.
And very quickly.
And Parashat is so beautiful because, as you know, at the end of the portion, when the cloud covered the tent of meeting, the verse tells us, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. And you and I have spoken many times about how the last section of Parashat Pekudei seems to be a parallel to the actual creation of heaven and earth. There are verses here that ring so similarly to the verses that we recite in Kiddush on Shabbat of how when Hashem created the world and took great joy in it, how we find that here as well. These verses are so similar, it's staggering, when reading in chapter 39 and verse 42. Like everything that Hashem commanded Moshe, so did the children of Israel perform all the labor. Moshe saw the entire work, and behold, they had done it as Hashem had commanded. So had they done. And Moshe blessed them. It's like a little mini Kiddush. Right. And that's because, of course, the sanctuary is the microcosm of the universe, and not only that, but the completion and the perfection of the universe, because here, Hashem is saying, if you want me in this world, I'll be with you. It's the opposite of what happened in the Garden of Eden.
It's the last thing that God wanted to create, but in order to create it, he needed man to
take the initiative,
because that's what it was, man's initiative to invite God into the world.
So Adam Harishon, kind of messed it up in the Garden of Eden.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Right. So Hashem said, I'm sorry, you have to leave now. And now Hashem is saying, may I come in?
Right.
So basically what this is all about, this incredible beauty, this unspeakable majesty of the building of the tabernacle in the desert, it's basically like Hashem is saying, like, can I stay a while? Mm-hmm. Can you set up house for me? It's like, can we sit down and have tea? It's like, this is basically keeping house.
Yeah.
And you know what? That is really what Medinat Yisrael is all about. That's what the state of Israel is. Also, it is a reflection of Hashem's majesty and glory in this world, and the state of Israel's perfection will come about through the building of the Holy Temple. And until then, we are in the pre-stages of redemption. The redemption has begun. This is redemption, but the ultimate redemption is the Shekhinah,
when we
return to the world. So there's a lot of parallels there, because there's a lot of voices in the world that seem bent on the destruction of the state of Israel, and that never changes. And the message that we want to broadcast to the world and to the naysayers and to the boycotters and to the enemies is, we're here to stay, and that's the whole concept of the Holy Temple. So I find a very amazing parallel here, and I don't know what you're going to think of this idea, but this struck me. I feel like Hashem is really enlightening me in this. That it wasn't a coincidence that the Aipac Convention took place in this time of these Torah portions.
Okay. Pray tell.
So the Aipac Convention, there's a big headline. A lot of people are very shocked at what happened there at this event in Washington, when the Aipac chief Howard Kaur actually called for the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is absolutely staggering to me, and so horrifically reprehensible that at the American Israel Public Affairs Committee's chief executive officer expressed strong support for the establishment of a Palestinian state during his address to the organization's 2018 conference in Washington, D.C. this past Sunday night. And this is despite the fact that the United States is clearly moving away from that whole old, tired myth of Israel's security being dependent on the two-state solution.
As has the state of Israel.
I'm about to talk about the state of Israel, but this guy, the CEO of Aipac, who's supposed to be, the whole idea of Aipac, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is that it's supposed to be standing up for Israel's existence, standing up for Israel's...
It's supposed to represent the policy of the Israeli government, whatever government that is. They're not supposed to create their own policy or recommend policy. And he basically...
So this guy, he says, the Jewish state will never live securely until she is at peace with all her neighbors. And he goes on to say, and I quote, "We must all work towards that future. 2 states for 2 peoples," he said. "One Jewish with secure and defensible borders and one Palestinian with its own flag and its own future. And that until that happens, we won't have peace." And you know what? I'm so totally aghast that he could say such a thing, as I know many people are.
Your timing's wrong, though. He should have. The Aipac Convention should have been a week ago, right before Purim, when in Purim we read about the Jews of Shushan who were all at the Mishteh, at the great banquet of Achashverosh, and as you like to point out, they were there eating their kosher food and playing along with
as
the game.
The temple was being mocked to their very eyes, as
Right.
Achashverosh was wearing the priestly garments and serving them the food from the temple vessels, as if to say, "Your God is dead. The temple's never going to be rebuilt." And he was celebrating that, but they all sat there.
Right.
And I've always said that, and I'm not going to pull any punches. I've always said that the Purim Suda, Achashverosh's banquet, described in the beginning of the Scroll of Esther, sounds like the Democratic National Convention. Well, you know what? And I'm not the only one who's saying this. Other writers have pointed out that this Aipac Convention seemed to be like a Democratic National Convention of Israel bashing. And I'm sorry, but it seems to me that speaker did not put Israel's interest at the forefront, and it was almost like this very pathetic sellout of American Jewry who have their own agenda, and they are dancing around their whole golden calf thing of exactly like we spoke about the golden calf, in terms of it being an expectation, in terms of it being a control thing and a comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, like, what's insulting and what's the most mind-boggling about this whole thing is, like, what about the citizens of the state of Israel? You don't live here. You don't deal with our security reality. And what does any of that have to do with the reality? Because that whole, like I say, tired claptrap of a mantra that's being repeated about peace with our neighbors and security. I mean, the Palestinians are the first ones who tell you they're absolutely not interested. And the Arab world is not interested in the Palestinians. And the whole Palestinian myth is a scam to keep the money pouring in, no strings attached, to keep the refugees, the so-called refugees, under the thumb of the wealthy so-called leaders that are lining their own pockets with European and American aid, and the beat goes on, and it has nothing to do with this false god of peace. That frankly, like Trump intimated at Davos, like, he doesn't think the Palestinians are interested. He doesn't think the Israelis are interested. Right on. We're not interested in self-immolation. We're not interested in being told, that we're squatters on our own land and that we have to start dismantling our own land. And those days are over. So it's just so incredible to me, because the whole idea of Parashat Vayakhel and Pekudei is like Hashem is saying, you know what, let me stay a while. I'd like to stay with you. Let's set up house, and let's let this romance continue forever. That's exactly why we exist. That's exactly why, as soon as we came out of Egypt, as soon as we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, we're told to build this tabernacle. That tabernacle is not a metaphor. It is not figurative. It is literal. But in the meantime, on the metaphorical level of the state of Israel, this is exactly who we are and what we're all about, and the heart of the reality of the resurrection of the state of Israel is indeed going to be the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and that's Hashem's message. Let's be friends. Let me stay a while. I don't want this to end. I don't want this to end. Just like we've taught that the whole concept of the tabernacle / what becomes the Holy Temple is that Hashem doesn't want the Sinai revelation to end, and we always want to be on that level of closeness. That's what we're aiming for here. So I'm just sick and tired of these I don't know what to call them exactly, of these people, deciding according to their own perverted and twisted and self-serving agenda, what Israel's needs are, and what Israel's agenda is, and what Israel's purpose is. And whoever could say such a thing and call for the establishment of two states, the last thing in his mind is Israel's security, because everyone knows that the two-state solution would lead, God forbid, to Israel's destruction.
One thing I'd like to point out that people often say it's we first, before we can even consider rebuilding the Holy Temple, we have to have unity in the nation and love between one another, and we're not there yet. And again, I think I point out it every year, as we see in these parshiot with the mentions of the hearts and the giving hearts and how people work together and how they work and achieved this so quickly.
It was the tabernacle that made them united.
Tabernacle. It was the act of doing what they did. It was fulfilling God's will to live in our world that put people together, that gave people one heart, that brought the nation together. So it's like saying, I have a cold, so don't talk to me about I'm not going to take medicine because I'm sick. Like, wait till I get help. It's like the medicine, the cure is here. The cure is in the building itself. The cure is in bringing God into our midst as God commanded.
There's a popular expression that the temple naysayers have, which is that only baseless love will build the Holy Temple. But the truth is, the Holy Temple is what brings about baseless love and unity and brotherhood, which is all the opposite of the Aipac Convention as far as I'm concerned, because what goes on in this land is got to be according to the agenda of Hashem, not the pathetic liberal Jews that are afraid of their own shadows. Oh, did I say that? Ouch. Might have lost some listeners. Stay with us if you dare. We'll be right back. Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven with Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 19th day of the month of Adar, 5778, March 6th, 2018. This coming Shabbat is a double portion Shabbat of Vayakhel and Pekudei, which closes out the book of Shemot / Exodus. As coming Shabbat is also the special Shabbat of Parashat Para, special reading of the Para Aduma, as one of the things we read in advance of the upcoming Passover holiday. And it is also Shabbat Mevarchin, in which we make the blessing for the upcoming new month of Nisan, which will be the following Shabbat. And as the Rabbi pointed out earlier, it's the 23rd of Adar, this Shabbat, and that is the beginning of the 7-day period of Miluim, a 7-day period of dedication. Once the tabernacle was built in the desert, a 7-day period of sort of a practice run, I believe, and inauguration, which led up to the first of Nisan, which was the 8th day of that period, which was the first day of the establishment of the tabernacle and the establishment of the divine service in the tabernacle, which of course we'll be reading about soon in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. That's what Vayikra is all about. It's about what happens inside the tabernacle. But I find it very amazing. The book of Exodus, it's called the book of Exodus. It could be called the book of Tabernacle because even though the Exodus is very dramatic and much more dramatic really than the description of the building of the tabernacle, and it leads to Mount Sinai, and that's all amazing. That's the first half of Exodus. I'm not even sure it's the first half. It's less than a half of the book. And then all the rest of the book is about the tabernacle. And the tabernacle is mentioned. We hear, and this is kind of unprecedented, that we hear this in-depth instruction being given by God to Moshe in Mount Sinai, only the two of them. It's totally personal, but yet like
reading someone's diary,
right? Like a fly in the wall, where
fly on the wall camera,
or someone had their smartphone on or something, recording the whole thing. Hot mic. We hear the entire thing in all the detail, and then
we hear it again.
And then we hear it again, as if Moshe wasn't even aware that it was recorded, and we read it. Then he tells the people, and then we're told how the people followed those instructions,
how they responded, how they reacted. It's all in stereo.
And then we hear the final accounting of all the material that was used, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like 3 or 4 or 5 times it's repeated, which only goes to show, if you ask me.
And there's no other subject in the whole Torah. Right. There's no other parallel in the whole Torah to such incredible, minute detail and amplification and repetition.
I mean, Shabbat. How do you observe the Shabbat? Well, there's only a couple of details given in the Torah. Everything else is Torah Shabbat, the oral Torah. But here,
which was given by Hashem at the same time at Sinai. But the point is that for all the complex detail of Shabbat, which is the cornerstone of Jewish faith, we are dependent on the oral tradition, which was given over by Hashem to Moshe and then clarified throughout the generations. That's what the whole idea of the Mishnah and the Talmud is all about. But how come that's not the case when it comes to the tabernacle? There's so much detail here.
And another question I have is, in the middle of all this tabernacle obsession is the debacle of the golden calf. And yet, once we get into this week's Torah reading of Vayakhel, it's like it's in the past. It's no longer present in what's going on.
Well, according to let's say Rashi, according to some opinions, the construction of the tabernacle was a direct result of the golden calf and is the rectification of the golden calf.
But
be that as it may,
if the golden calf story wasn't included, it still would. The Torah would still read smoothly. Moshe gets the instructions. He comes down from Sinai, and
exactly. It was a bump. That's all it was. It was a little ripple. And Hashem was ready to go on business as usual,
right?
As opposed to, as we've said many times, to the spies later, which was not a ripple.
Which again, God was ready to go on business as usual because He so much wanted this place in our world that okay, Moshe, it's settled. Like you dealt with it. I forgive them. Let's move on. Mm-hmm. And as it comes to the spies, their sin was basically. Wasn't a bump in the road. It was saying, that place in the world that you want, we're not sure we want it.
Because as difficult as this sounds, as hard it is for some people to comprehend, the idea is that the sin of the golden calf was not a sin against Hashem.
Right.
It was their own, as I taught last week in the video, it was their own sense of vulnerability, their own anxiety, their own insecurity, and their own need for control. But the sin of the spies was a sin against Hashem.
Also,
it really was. Because the land of Israel, here again, and I tell this to the Aipac chief Howard Kaur, who's calling for the establishment of a Palestinian state. The situation of the land of Israel is a direct reflection of Hashem. And it is Hashem's heart and it's Hashem's will for us. So when you doubt the land of Israel, you're doubting God more than when you doubt Him through the golden calf. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Aipac.
And the tabernacle was not constructed so that it could be forever in the desert. It was constructed to be brought into the land of Israel and eventually to become the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. But
listen, Yitzchak, I gotta tell you something. Your first drasha that you made here on the mic was about the book of Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
well, it should be called this. Book of Exodus is only the opening theme, and the rest is about the tabernacle. Don't forget, Exodus is the Latin word.
Right.
In Hebrew, the book is called Shmot,
Right.
which means names. And it begins with a tally, a census of the children of Israel, the ones that were still in Egypt. And it begins, these are the names. These are the names of the children of Israel, children of Jacob who came down.
These are
to
the same
Egypt.
people who built the Mishkan, who built the tabernacle.
They're children.
Yeah.
But the point is, I've always felt that the book of names is called so because, like, our name is in that book.
Mm-hmm.
It's about us.
Yeah.
And one thing that you really get from this whole tabernacle mania, you call it a tabernacle obsession, that we're reading about in these Torah portions, especially, it really hits home when you read about these nedivei lev, these generous of heart, these people that are motivated by their heart, these people who are carried by their heart, and these people who are wise of heart. It's so individual, and it's such like an intimate record, and this is about people. And Hashem's relationship with us is about people. It's individual. And the whole idea of the tabernacle is very personal. A person comes there and engages in a direct relationship with Hashem. And so the name of the book is perfect because this is the whole dynamic. It's personal. It's about each and every person being called by name.
Absolutely. Another thing, I want to get back to the golden calf. For 39 days, and it was on a 39th day that the nation fell, because that was when they thought that Moshe should have returned already. For 39 days, they were inactive. They were idle. They were twiddling their thumbs. I mean, they weren't given something to do as a nation. Once they were given a task as a nation with the building of the tabernacle, they were busy with that. So their straying was a result of being idle, of not having a purpose yet, a reason to congeal, to unify as a nation. And it's almost, their 39 days was sort of like 39 days of a taste of the leisure society, modern world where we work in order to have leisure time so that we can do our own thing and obsess with our own obsessions. And it's almost as if, God gave Israel that little window. You can either be a nation that's dedicated to being a home for God's presence in the world, or you can be a nation that's dedicated to everybody doing their own thing and having their own obsessions and having leisure time so that they can, play tennis, they can do yoga, they can do whatever. But see what happens when you go with that program. The effort that is demanded every day, even today, in the land, as part of being part of the Jewish nation, to be a united people, that's the effort that makes us a united people. As we were saying before, it's the what's the word? What kind of love is it?
Unequivocal?
No, the love. People say you have to have the love before you can build a mikdash.
Oh, baseless.
Baseless love. Baseless meaning just.
I'm sorry, unconditional.
Unconditional love. Unconditional love. Well, yeah, that unconditional love is what emerges out of a nation that has a purpose. And that's, I believe that the nation of Israel today, that we, as a nation, we share this purpose. And not everybody is in the same place necessarily right now. Not everybody's totally on board, but I think we're getting there.
I got news for you. The whole concept of the state of Israel is unconditional love. I think that's what we experience here. I think that's what we give each other, and I think that's what it's built on.
And that's what makes it unique, and that's why Israel is.
And it's something that can't be understood unless you live here.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Israel's the center of attention and in the news all the time for, for and against. But it's that phenomenon that is the magnet for the world.
In the meantime, there's all these leaks of that are purported to be the Trump peace deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like what I'm reading about the peace deal, if that's what it is. The Palestinian Arabs get a demilitarized state and limited sovereignty with East Jerusalem as a capital and international supervision. And the so-called Palestinians have already been quick to reject it. Mm-hmm. And they say that they're not even going to accept this peace deal anyway. And the president's people say that we haven't released anything, this isn't it. But one thing is for sure, what's being touted in the press as leaks of what his peace deal consists of, it doesn't sound like the same spirit as the declaration of the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital. Like, and this is what bothers me so much. Like, which is it? Which side are you on exactly? And I say the same thing to the government of the state of Israel with its ambivalence about Judea and Samaria, etc.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
the
there
whole
seems
idea
to be
is
a disconnect between
there is a disconnect
between what Trump states, and he stated again just yesterday in his meeting with Netanyahu, saying that they've taken Jerusalem off the table. One would assume that would mean that Jerusalem is going to, as
Non-negotiable.
far as non-negotiable. But according to the leaks, it would be negotiable. But in any case, I can't really imagine, Rabbi, a peace plan that I would approve of, that I would like. I mean, just the idea of there having to be. I mean, a peace plan implies that there's a Palestinian side that's going to, get some form of independence here.
Any
in our
plan
land.
that calls for any sort of surgical procedure of cutting Israel in half, of cutting territory out of
I
Israel,
reject.
has nothing to do with reality, and is not in Israel's interest, and will not lead to Israel's security, but will lead to Israel's demise. Aside from the fact that it's totally against everything that we believe in and everything that we're talking about our existence altogether as the people that represent Hashem in this world, and as the purpose of the state of Israel to bring Hashem into this world. So it's all just in disguise as something else altogether.
So I don't know what to make of whatever this peace plan might be, but
Like I said, Vayakhel and Pekudei, these Torah portions, it's all about like Hashem basing and say, let's set up house together. Let's be together. And it's supposed to be temporary.
what was that? It's not supposed to be temporary.
Not supposed to be temporary.
And that's the peace plan. Building a house
the
for
peace
God
plan.
in the heart of our land is the peace plan. And it's been the peace plan for 4,000 years. And we have to just stick to that. No other peace plan. Any other peace plan, by definition, that's not that peace plan, defies that peace plan. It can't be.
Let's go deeper here for a moment. This Shabbat is also the special Torah reading of Parashat Parah. It's the Sabbath of the Parah Aduma, which is one of the 4 special Sabbaths that precede Passover. Ostensibly, the reason for the reading this Shabbat of the Maftir, the additional Torah reading from the beginning of Numbers chapter 19 about the Red Heifer, is because in temple times, when the whole nation comes to make the pilgrimage for the festival of Passover, they have to purify themselves in order to come to the Holy Temple, and that can only be done through the ashes of the Red Heifer. There's also a deeper connection, which is the connection between the Red Heifer and the golden calf. Because, as our sages teach, the expression is let the mother come and clean up the child's filth. And the analogy is to a king's palace, and he has a servant in the palace, and one day the servant brings her child, and the child makes some filth on the floor. And so the king says, let the mother come and clean up the filth of the child. So the heifer is the mother of the calf. And on a very deep level of understanding, the concept of the golden calf brought this certain spirit of the impurity of death into the world. And the solution to that, the antidote to that, of course, is the ashes of the red heifer. So that's on one level, but there's a deeper level to the whole mystique and the whole concept of the red heifer, which of course is that it is a chok, it is a type of rule, type of mitzvah, which is called in the Torah chok, which is translated as ordinance, but which means there are different types of commandments in the Torah. There are some that are for a sign between Israel and God. There are some that are obviously very moral and logical, and there are some for which we really don't have an explanation. And as we've been speaking about throughout the book of Exodus, the whole expression of Na'aseh v'nishma, that Israel said at Mount Sinai, we will do and we will hear, we will do and we will obey, meaning first we will do, whether we understand it or not. We will do. We commit ourselves to action, and then we will try to understand, but we don't understand everything. And there's a concept that there are some commandments that Hashem gives us about which He lets us know in advance that they are beyond the level of human comprehension. And one of them is the ordinance of the red heifer, of the cleansing from the impurity of death through the ashes of the red heifer. And this has a lot to do also with the opposite of the golden calf, because the golden calf was about control. And the red heifer teaches us that we really don't know anything. We think that we're smart. We are saturated with information, the superhighway. With one click, we have access to all the knowledge of the world. And you know what? With all of that, you don't know anything. And that's what Hashem wants us to know. We don't know anything about this world. We don't know anything about anything. And the purpose of our lives is to understand that we don't really know anything. And that's something that's so far from all of the aristocrats and pundits and bureaucrats and governments and leaders who try to impose their will on a sovereign people and who try to decide how they're going to cut things up and how they're going to determine our children's future. But you know what? You don't know anything, because that's not what Hashem wants.
And you just made me think of another aspect of the commandment for the preparation of the red heifer, and that it needs to be done outside of the mikdash, outside of the temple. But
it's the only aspect of the temple service that's actually, that's what it's called. It's not actually a korban. It's a process of preparation, but it's actually done outside facing.
Right. And so I was going to say, it's actually done outside on the Mount of Olives, but the Kohen, the priest who's doing it, has to have direct line of vision into the temple itself, meaning we don't know anything, but we have to keep our eye on the ball at all times. We have to keep our eye on the source and at the center of all times. That's how we maintain our balance.
And honestly, sometimes you're outside, and you can only gaze.
But you need to keep that, as they say in Hebrew, kesher ayin, that eye contact.
Line of vision.
Line of vision.
And by the way, and it's not a by the way at all, it's not a minor aside, it's a very, very major announcement. You know, we mounted a campaign. It was actually 2 years ago for raising red heifers in Israel. The red heifer, of course, is a very elusive concept. You can learn all about it on the Temple Institute's website. I'm sure there'll be a prominent feature for this weekend in honor of the Sabbath of the red heifer reading. But you know, we have a program that we've been keeping under wraps to actually raise kosher red heifers here in Israel. This is the result of many, many years, actually many decades, of attempts, whether it was importing, whether it was trying to locate the heifers that would be proper candidates for the biblical red heifer. And the latest twist in these programs, which we began some time ago on an undisclosed location here in the land of Israel, was to begin a generation of red heifers here in Israel. And I'm very, very happy to announce that shortly, just around Passover time, we have 5 cows that are about to give birth. Mm-hmm. That we are in partnership with a grower, that are going to be delivered to the guardianship, as it were, of the Temple Institute. And if any of the calves born of these cows fit the requirements for candidacy for the red heifer that's needed for the Holy Temple, they're going to be raised under very, very specific, very, very controlled environment conditions, so that they will be able to be considered proper, and they're going to be under rabbinical supervision, under Kohanic supervision. And we will have more of this developing story in the very, very near future, so watch for it. And it's wonderful to be able to share that with you on the eve of this Shabbat Parashat Para.
We should have some photos soon. Hopefully we will post not of the not yet born calves, but of the mothers. And, of course, any testimony which marks the progress of this project, I think, is very welcome, should be very welcome. So, Rabbi, this Shabbat we're wrapping up Exodus. We're
It's
wrapping
been quite a ride.
quite a ride, and basically this Shabbat we're completing the tabernacle, and at which point Moshe then dedicates the tabernacle, and then next week we are going to jump right into Vayikra, Leviticus, and what happens inside that tabernacle. And as you and I have, every year we get very excited about starting Leviticus, and every year I believe that our understanding of it just increases, because basically it's what happens inside the heart of creation, the heart of a nation, the heart of creation. And it really is the inner workings, and they're very, very mysterious, and it requires a tremendous amount of focus in order to really begin to get into that and understand it. That's all for next week. In any case, here is the music. So that's it for this week. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.